Hello and welcome to Oral Communication Comms 2101. My name is Rajendra and I'm very pleased to be your lecturer for this programme. For the next 12 weeks we're going to be focusing on different communication scenarios, and through those scenarios and ultimately the assignments that make up the 100% coursework for this course, I encourage you to be creative and be exploratory, and hope that you will also develop a deeper appreciation of structure as a way of improving the ways you actually present and interact through communication when it is used orally. What I'm actually going to be doing is speaking to the lecture slides that I've created so that we have a conversation about communication and the different types of presentation we're going to be looking at. And that conversation will extend into the tutorials. I encourage you to engage with the material and interact with your particular tutors in order to develop a deeper appreciation of the material and hopefully take away something that is lasting and will be useful to you beyond just doing this course. So as I said, we're going to be exploring communication through a range of speech situations. What I did was I wanted to use these three quotes to explore something in particular about what we're really going for, what the end point is of these presentations that we're doing. So the first one is communication is something that we're going for that lingers long after the last word has been spoken. So this speaks to the idea of a communication event being memorable, being compelling. Maybe it resonates with you emotionally and takes you on a journey. Maybe you remember it and it's persuasive because it's funny. What I hope we can do through this course, and you can demonstrate through your presentations, are the different ways in which communication can be memorable, and we will hopefully get to explore a variety of ways in which that can be done. The second quote is, "The biggest communication problem is that we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply." And I put this in because I want part of our course to focus on being reflective and thoughtful in communication interactions. One of the assignments is a journalistic interview in which you are conducting that interview. And of course, in interacting with someone, you're required to be sensitive to what they're saying in order to move the conversation forward. And I think this is a really useful skill to take away from this course. And so we're going to be exploring a number of particular interviewers. We're going to look at interviewing style and develop from those particular exercises. The last quote is, "I probably will do it, maybe definitely." This is a confusing, direct statement. It's likely memorable to you because it's from the US President Trump, and it indicates ways in which communication can be memorable but in ways that we don't particularly desire, and so we're going to hopefully find ways to avoid doing that. So this is an overview slide talking about what we're actually going to be doing today in this lecture that I've called Communicating Well. I'm going to talk about some elements of oral communication that are going to be of particular focus to us for this particular course, and therefore I'm also going to talk about the coursework assignments and how what we're looking at connects to those assignments. In terms of theory, I actually want us to look at the work of LASSWELL. Harold Dwight Lasswell was an American He passed away in 1978, and he was actually a political scientist and communication theorist. And he came up with a theory that he named after himself. It's called LASSWELL'S DICTUM or LASSWELL'S theorem. And we're going to explore that today. It was actually a mass communication theory, and on the surface very simple, but it's been applied to many different communication scenarios, and I think it will be useful for us because it will allow us to get a bit deeper into what we're talking about with respect to the communication process. And lastly, I want us to apply some of what we've learned through this lecture, and so we're going to talk about communication in practice, and we're going to focus on ways in which we can reduce anxiety. I've said prepared to be panic-free when we actually present. A couple of the presentations that we're going to do for this course will be pre-recorded, and then there will be presentations that you'll do in real time just to your tutorial group. But I know that can generate some kind of anxiety, and I think there are useful lessons that we can learn from each other in talking about, you know, how we overcome these kinds of things. What makes a person's speech or their presentation memorable? I think there are so many different elements that feed into this. Of course, one of them is the delivery, and we're going to be practicing elements of delivery in order to make ourselves more comfortable with the kinds of material that we're presenting. The other is the way we use the words that we do. Dr. Martin Luther King on the left is really well known for his "I Have a Dream" speech. There was a book written by a UK journalist called Gary Young about this particular event, and you should look it up, look up the book, but I believe that the line "I have a dream" actually was used many times throughout the speech, and one of the things that made it memorable was the fact that it was a repeated line. On the far right we have Dr. Eric Williams, who was a highly charismatic presenter. There are lots of presenters throughout history, famous people and not famous people, who actually have a way of presenting that draws people to them and that kind of keeps an audience's attention. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And he said slavery was not born of racism, rather racism was the consequence of slavery. That particular type of phrase is one that we can lean on and look at in the course of what we're doing, because there are ways in which we can construct phrases and construct ideas that can become encapsulated in a really tight and memorable phrase, and I think we should think about that. Oprah Winfrey in the middle said, "History is still being written. You're writing it every day. What you do and what you don't do will be part of it. You build a legacy, not from one thing, but from everything." She said that in 2018 in a University of Southern California speech that she gave. And again, I think she's one of those people who is able, through conversation and through the way that she presents, to keep your attention. And so we should work on that kind of thing too. So here's our list of assignments. Of course, the things that we're going to be doing through this course are looking at speeches and practicing different kinds of presentation. And so far we've been talking about things that are, you know, highly memorable and maybe really rousing and moving. And one of those assignments is going to be that kind of thing. But it doesn't depend on you being able to act the speech, but rather to deliver it authentically. And so that will be the occasion speech, or maybe if you don't wish to do an occasion speech, I'm going to give you the option of doing a TED Talk as an individual presentation, and that's one of those that's going to be delivered in real time. The real time presentation takes some of the tension away of having to do a recorded presentation, and recording creates another kind of issue, in that you feel like you have to develop a kind of script, and that can make things sound belaboured or awkward. So we're going to have to work on presenting in a way that doesn't do that. The first two assignments, the how-to presentation, is one that's pre-recorded and you'll submit it. The second assignment is also pre-recorded, and I'd like you to submit that as an audio file. As I said, we're going to be doing an interview, and that's going to be a short clip, probably from a larger interview that you do, but it demonstrates your ability to manage a conversation and manage an interview in particular, and show some of those skills. And then the last assignment is a group presentation in which we're going to be in small groups within the tutorial and actually construct a communication presentation about communication, and we'll of course talk more about that as we go along. I think it's important to acknowledge that we come to this course with different skills, and we're going to develop the skills that we have and hopefully work on crafting some new ones. But for me, it's important that you bring your own point of view and your unique perspective, your way of seeing something and saying it. So this course is not about creating the perfect presenter for every situation. It's about you developing skills to become a more proficient kind of presenter. And in some cases, you will have skills that you can lean on for the particular assignment, and they're a great resource, and that's wonderful. In others, you'll be working on skills that are new to you, and I think it's important to reflect on where you're at and what you're trying to do. So you might bring, an attitude to your presentation, a certain kind of gravitas. You may have a certain writing ability and be able to create a speech that is memorable because of the way it's crafted. And the reality is the words you speak can change somebody. So to what degree are we going to change the world? Well, maybe it's just going to be our world that we change, our individual experience of what it means to present, and that's okay. Because on the one hand, this course is about becoming a better speaker. On the other, it's about your own development and setting a personal goal. So I don't want you to take away from this that this is a course about theatre, because it's not really about that. So why is theory important, and why is it important to us in particular as students of oral communication? So as communication students, you will have come across models of communication. These are seeking to explain what is actually happening in that elusive communication process. We can talk about the unidirectional models, they also go by the name the hypodermic needle models, or SMCR models. And these usefully have a metaphor of an archer firing off an arrow to explain the communication process. And what we're saying in using that model to explain the process is that once a message has been sent, the sender has communicated. This particular model is really useful for explaining communication when it happens in emergency type situations where commands are given, where information is put out. The belief is that communication has happened at this point, and at that point the sender has completed their task, if you like. We then have models that are called two-directional models and or two-step models, and these particular models, of which there are many versions according to different situations, usefully use the metaphor of a pair of dancers to explain the communication process. If you imagine a pair dancing, we might talk about one leading and the other following, but in fact a sensitive dancer is going to be responding to the partner, and therefore we have implicit in that two-step model this concept of feedback, which says that those two poles, if you like, the sender and receiver in the communication process, are actually in constant interaction. There's a constant negotiation in that communication process. The model I want to have us consider today is a communication process, communication that is happening, that is omnidirectional, diachronic. Omnidirectional means all directions, and so what we're talking about is the fact that a message has gone out and there will be necessarily multiple meanings. Diachronic refers to time and the facet of time, and it's to say that that meaning actually changes with time. So if you think about the process of maybe counselling and being counselled by someone, given advice by someone, as that conversation happens, meaning is being generated, and we can talk about meaning being emergent. Meaning emerges. You understand as that conversation happens the issues that you're contending with in a deeper and deeper way. But it's also true that over the passage of time, what you understood by what was said at the time changes. So at some point in the future, it can be that that meaning has transformed in some way. And so as students of oral communication, I want us to think about when we're presenting and the fact that we're seeking to clarify, maybe through feedback, maybe through modification as we speak, but also that there's the possibility that what we say will mean something else in the future, and therefore we want to think about those possibilities too. So here we are at the work of LASSWELL, and I've put model in quotes because it could be argued that LASSWELL constructed these 5 questions to ask of the communication process to be modified in different theoretical situations, in different theoretical inquiries. And therefore it's not so much a model as an index. It points to something, or it's a dictum. It states something that we should think about. So we're going to use those terms interchangeably, bearing in mind that model may not be completely true because we're thinking about it in different ways. All right, so LASSWELL had in mind these 5 particular questions. Who, as the communicator, says what in terms of their content, in which channel, and for the purposes of today's lecture, I really want us to think about the fact that the first assignment is a how-to video, how to do something, and you are going to create your own how-to, meaning you're going to formulate your information and advice or instructions, and it's going to be posted on YouTube. Then LASSWELL asks to whom and with what effect. So let's just dig into this a little bit. When we talk about the who, we may assume that that is clear to everyone and even clear to ourselves. But actually I want us to think of ourselves as existing in multiples in some way. If who defines our role, maybe by gender, by age, by function as a student, it could equally be that we consider ourselves to be an expert or asking questions and generating inquiry as the who. And therefore, I think in thinking about the multiple ways we occupy our roles, we will actually be thinking more deeply about the message that we're creating, the message that we're sending, the content. So the message itself, as we've already said, can be construed in multiple ways, and I want us to think about creating the content that we will for this assignment. Think about the ways in which things could be misunderstood and that we need to work to generate some kind of clarity or precision. In our particular case, the which is going to be YouTube, and there are thousands of YouTube videos out there on this medium, but YouTube itself as a channel has a particular agenda and therefore creates some pressures, creates some structuring on what we can say and the ways in which we say it. The whom that we're talking about, who is our audience? Well, actually I think it's better for us to think about audiences in the multiple as well. So who are our audiences? Someone may be coming to your content because they consider you an expert, because they consider you entertaining, but equally they may be more focused on the precision of the information because actually they're coming to you to better understand a particular task and therefore are less concerned with how you look on the video and more concerned with what you're saying in a way that the instructions become repeatable. And lastly, with what effect? What is the impact of what it is that you're putting out there? I want you to think about that. And maybe to think about it in this way, that this particular dictum appears to present a unidirectional linear communication process, but actually I think it's a really good model for explaining what is happening in mass media, what happens in the communication process on social media, when in fact audiences on YouTube, for example, can add comments to content. Sometimes those comments refer to the specific content. Sometimes commentators comment on other comments. Other times people will bring in content in the conversation or in the commentary in reference to what has been presented. And so in that way, this mass communication platform is actually something that creates a space for feedback. Mass communication is used by scholars to sample audiences, the belief being that there are certain kinds of users of certain kinds of platform, and therefore it's a deceptively simple index which I think really can be used to help us get a bit deeper into what we're interested in. LASSWELL himself applied this particular dictum to political commentary, and he introduced the concept of a politician asking something of an audience, using what assets, what resources, and to what impact. And therefore, he actually had more than 5 questions when considering it in the political context. And so, as I say, it's more complicated than perhaps it seems on the screen as it's written in those 5 questions. So let's just flesh out our knowledge of what LASSWELL was saying a little bit in order to deepen our knowledge again. LASSWELL himself, as I've said, worked in the areas of politics and communication, and when he was thinking about the communication process and its function through the emergence of mass media and broadcast, he considered the role that it was having in surveillance of the environment or of society. The speakers through the particular platforms that he was working with were people of people who controlled the power, as it were, and so he was thinking about communicators in terms of politicians, diplomats, those who had a stake in modifying and controlling the environment, and perhaps that's not so relevant to what we're talking about in oral communication, but certainly 2 and 3 are. LASSWELL used his model to consider what was happening with the information, and actually I think we can extend this idea of the correspondence between parts of society to think about what it is we're actually putting out through the content. It actually speaks to the multiple audiences and what we're seeking to have them believe, not only believe about the content, but maybe believe about us as individuals. So as a presenter, you are actually recreating in some way how you are seen, and as a presenter on a platform like YouTube, where you're putting out content that stays there, you are putting out content that can be referred to later, and therefore that individual is perhaps no longer you at some point in the future. So I do want you to think about the ways time changes the way we want to be seen, and think about that in response to the kinds of content you're asked to produce. Lastly, this idea of cultural transmission between generations I think is important. Again, that speaks to the longevity of media that's created, and the fact that in a given moment a platform has certain kinds of content, and as individual presenters I think we can nudge things forward, we can augment arguments, and we can seek to kind of change the narrative in some way by presenting a particular point of view, which is why at the beginning of this lecture I was saying I think there's real value in presenting a unique point of view or a specific point of view and seeking to be creative with the content. Of course, for the purposes of what we're doing, there are assignments to be marked, but I think within the context of that you can think about the ways in which you can present something new. So we're going to come back to LASSWELL'S model in tutorial, and I'm going to put up a paper, a research paper that I think is important, about the concept of reading LASSWELL. The paper itself talks about reading back, and this concept in research of reading back is not to say we're looking at LASSWELL'S model or dictum from the point of view of the effect working backwards, but really we're looking at it with respect to its how it stood the test of time, how it's been impacted by history, and whether it's still relevant. And as I am saying, I believe it is still a very relevant model, despite the criticism of it being unidirectional, because we can see ways in that it can be modified and spoken about to talk about mass communication and what is happening on social media today. So I would like to move into the third and final section of this opening lecture to talk a little bit about the anxiety we may have with respect to public speaking or presenting. There is this pressure, I think, to always say the right thing and put our best foot forward. And I want you to step away from that somewhat and understand that this is a case, these presentations are a case of developing new knowledge as much as they are showing what you can do. So as I've said, over the course we're going to be doing a number of different oral presentations, and some of them are going to be recorded and 2 of them are going to be real time. So I think maybe that should help alleviate some of the pressure you feel in terms of presenting. As I said earlier as well, this is not about the theatrics of presenting or being theatrical. If you're the kind of presenter who presents a story in a particular way, then there is space for you to do your thing and present in the way that you do and be marked equally well, because one of the things that we're working on in this course is about developing structure, another is the use of language, and maybe the third important and equally important facet is in delivery. So we have a number of different components of the oral communication process that you're working on. But I think it is completely natural to feel anxious, and I think everyone actually feels it to different degrees. I was looking around at some information and I found on the University of Iowa's counselling service the statistic that 75% of people, so 3 out of 4 people, actually have a fear of public speaking, glossophobia. So it's really common, and I think it's only natural to have, a certain degree of nervousness. Actually, that cortisol boost that you get can heighten your awareness and get you into a certain kind of flow where you build up resilience. So I actually want to quote 3 pieces of advice, and the first one is that you should expect a positive reaction from your audience, whether it's for this course or beyond. I don't think you should be oblivious to what is happening if you're working in front of an audience, but know that mostly an audience wants you to succeed, and certainly if 75% of people understand the stress of having to do it, then they feel bad for you when things aren't working out. So they're not looking for you to fail. Nobody is looking out for that. So the process of presenting can obviously be made easier by a degree of preparation. I think if you practice your delivery, if you run through it, maybe even if you run through it with an audience, whether it be somebody else online or somebody who you are in front of face to face, you can present to them, and even the process of speaking it out to them without any feedback from them, I think can be useful, because it helps you over the areas that you're stumbling with and the kinds of language issues that you can have when you're presenting. Sometimes you can tie up your words or tie up your ideas. Everyone does it, and practicing can really be helpful with identifying what is happening there. Now, while I was talking about multiple audiences, I think we can also be aware of the broader umbrella of what an audience might look like, and know that an audience has certain expectations, and be mindful of those expectations. So if you set out to deliver a certain kind of content and then your message wavers and you end up digressing, then one could understand why an audience may lose connection with you. That's not about necessarily the way you've delivered the content per se, in terms of your voice projection and your modulation and interest, but the fact that you've gone off topic and therefore somebody is no longer hearing what they expected to hear. So we're going to work on how you can build that into your presentation so as to help maintain an audience's attention in different ways. So the second piece of advice is that it can be useful, I think, to read some inspirational quotes, listen to a motivational speak when you need that push. Don't berate yourself for being where you're at with your content or with what you're doing, but sometimes it can be useful to kind of get that boost from content that's out there, and it can really kind of push you to thinking about what you're doing in a positive way. So this dancer who's leaping across a stage, this is not his first time. It's true of anyone who does anything multiple times and appears perfect in their presentation: an athlete, a pianist, an artist, a cook, whatever it might be. And that is to say that nothing is perfect in the first draft, in the first attempt, except by a stroke of luck, I suppose, and maybe another kind of deeper practice or process that you have that's led you to that point. But I think there's real value in practice, and I think expressing your anxiety to someone can be useful, talking it out with fellow students or colleagues or friends, and again practicing your presentation. They will hopefully, in listening, become very aware when you're speaking too quickly or when you need to project your voice, when it becomes too quiet or you're mumbling. I think in live presentations, often you'll see people on a stage with a bottle of water, and it can be something that they use as a crutch, or it can also be completely necessary to lubricate your throat as you're speaking. So we're saying think positively, motivate yourself, practice in front of an audience, and practice generally. And lastly, third bit of advice in boosting your confidence and preparation for presentations is to seek to engage your audience. So in a live presentation, and we will be getting into this content, in a live presentation, it might be about maintaining eye contact. Certainly in your video content and your audio content, you'll want to use voice to keep an audience engaged. You can use rhetorical questions, you can use questions generally, maybe even seeking direct feedback from an audience who's present. All of these things can help build rapport. As I've been saying, through this course, we are going to be looking at multiple ways of doing certain things, and hopefully it will increase your bag of tricks that you can dip into when creating a presentation or engaging in dialogue. So as I was saying, engaging people might be about having a great story or a well-written story, but equally it could be about being light, being humorous, if this is appropriate, and if it's something that you can do easily and maybe do naturally. We're going to be talking about the various ways in which you can make impact on your audience. And while the three statements, being positive, being prepared, and engaging, apply to a live speech, they also apply to content that you're creating, that you're recording and uploading. I really do hope that you enjoy this course and that you make use of the expertise and interest of the tutors who come from various backgrounds and bring their own perspectives on oral communication and presenting. And throughout the course, you will be engaging with them, and hopefully there will be content from some of them for all of us to look at and benefit from, because I do think that everyone has their own way of doing things, and the purpose of this course is really in seeking to make you more comfortable with the presentations that you're going to be doing now for this course and in the future. And with that, I thank you.